My name is Avery Pierce, and at 32, I operated under the comforting delusion that I had my family all figured out. My grandmother, Eleanor, has always been my anchor, especially this past year when my freelance photography career hit some seriously choppy seas. Our weekly family dinners at my parents' home were a ritual I held dear. Despite a persistent, unspoken tension that clung to us like a damp chill, none of us could have foreseen how one seemingly harmless question would tear a hole through decades of carefully guarded secrets. But before I detail how my entire world unraveled over a pot roast, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. And if you're as fascinated by family secrets as I am, make sure to subscribe, because you'll want to hear how skeletons like these never stay in the closet for long. Growing up, I was keenly aware that Grandma Eleanor was wealthy. Not just well off, but truly rich, thanks to the real estate empire my grandfather had meticulously built before he passed away 15 years ago. While my parents, Clara and Robert, lived a very deliberate middle-class existence, Eleanor's home was a timeless manor in the most affluent corner of the city. With its perfectly sculpted gardens and a loyal staff who had been there since my earliest memories, there was always something slightly off about how my parents behaved in her presence. My mother would stretch her smile into a tight, brittle line that never quite reached her eyes, while my father would retreat into an unusual silence, becoming almost timid. As a kid, I just assumed this was the strange language of adults. But as I got older, I started to pick up on the bitter undercurrent of resentment, especially from my mother. "Your grandmother thinks her money makes her better than all of us," she would mutter after we'd leave a family gathering. "She's held it over your father's head, and mine for our entire marriage." Despite my mother's attitude, Eleanor and I shared a special bond. She was the one who bought me my first professional camera when I was 13, showing a flicker of interest in photography. She wholeheartedly backed my decision to study art in college, even as my parents pushed for a more practical business degree. "You have to follow your passion, Avery," she told me during my senior year. "Life is far too short to live it seeking someone else's approval." My siblings had their own ways of navigating the family currents. Leo, my older brother, maintained a respectful distance. He'd carved out a career in finance, just as our father had always hoped, and seemed driven to succeed entirely on his own terms, free from Eleanor's influence. Chloe, my younger sister, was polite but detached, often emulating our mother's stiff formality around our grandmother. After college, I managed to build a modest but promising photography business. I had a handful of steady clients and was earning enough to afford a small city apartment and start chipping away at my student loans. Then the economic downturn hit, and my largest client, a boutique hotel chain that made up nearly 60% of my income, canceled all their contracts indefinitely. All of a sudden, I was scrambling to make rent. I never breathed a word of my financial woes to my family. My parents had always been critical of my career path, and I couldn't stand the thought of their "I told you so" lectures. Leo was dealing with his own financial fallout from a messy divorce that had wiped out his savings. Chloe was still a graduate student and barely had 2 pennies to rub together. The only person I felt I could confide in was Grandma Eleanor. I visited her one afternoon, really just hopping for a bit of advice. Instead, she was adamant about offering more. "Let me support you until you get back on your feet," she said with a firm resolve. "That's what family is for." I reluctantly accepted what I believed was a one-time gift to cover my rent and groceries for the month. I had no idea what was truly transpiring behind the curtain. In the months that followed, I noticed my parents acting even more strangely whenever Eleanor's name came up. My mother would suddenly remember an urgent task in another room, and my father would become intensely absorbed in whatever sports game was on TV. I chalked it up to their usual discomfort around the topic of Eleanor's wealth. The day of the fateful dinner arrived on a cool autumn evening. I parked my beat-up 10-year-old sedan behind my father's gleaming new SUV, an upgrade I'd been surprised to see him driving a few months back. Just taking advantage of a 0% financing deal, he'd explained vaguely when I asked. The house I grew up in felt different, too. The front yard boasted new, elaborate landscaping, and as I stepped inside, I saw the living room had been completely redecorated with furniture that screamed expensive. "Do you like it?" Mom asked, gesturing around with a proud flourish. We decided it was time to treat ourselves a little. "It looks amazing," I said, my mind racing to figure out how a high school administrator and a mid-level insurance manager were suddenly affording such luxuries. Business must be good. "We're getting by," Dad said a little too quickly. "Can I get you a drink?" As I sipped the pricey wine he poured, I wandered through the house, noticing more and more upgrades. A brand new kitchen with marble countertops, high-end appliances that shone under new recessed lighting, and designer fixtures everywhere. My parents were coupon clippers, people who bought generic brands. This sudden explosion of wealth just didn't make sense. Leo arrived next, making a beeline for the liquor cabinet and pouring himself a heavy-handed scotch. He'd been drinking more since the divorce, but tonight he seemed particularly determined to numb himself. "Big day at work?" I asked, attempting to break the ice. "Something like that," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Is Eleanor here yet?" Chloe was the last to show up before our grandmother, rushing in with her eyes glued to her phone. She offered a distracted hello to the room, her thumbs moving with a frantic energy. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just school stuff," she said dismissively, even though her master's program was on a semester break. She, too, seemed on edge, as if bracing for an impact. The atmosphere was thick with an unspoken tension that was almost suffocating. At precisely 6:00, the doorbell chimed. Grandma Eleanor was nothing if not punctual. Dad rushed to the door while Mom issued frantic, last-minute instructions. "Everyone smile, best behavior, not a word about the new kitchen." Eleanor entered like a visiting monarch, elegant in a tailored navy dress and her trademark pearl necklace. At 78, she carried herself with the unwavering confidence of a woman who had spent decades commanding boardrooms and navigating social minefields. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Avery, darling." She pulled me into a warm embrace, her familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 wrapping around me like a cherished memory. I saw my mother's shoulders tense at the display of affection. Mom ushered us into the dining room, where she had prepared an extravagant feast. Prime rib, truffle-laced mashed potatoes, freshly baked rolls. It was a spread reserved for major holidays. "You've gone to quite some trouble, Clara," Eleanor observed, her gaze sweeping over the expensive wine and the elaborate floral centerpiece. "Just wanted to make it nice," Mom replied, her smile stretched thin. "Family is everything after all." We took our seats, Dad at one end of the table and Eleanor at the other. a perfect physical representation of the power dynamic that had governed our family for as long as I could remember. The conversation started on safe ground, local news, the weather, but the tension simmered just beneath the surface. As dinner wore on, Eleanor began asking pointed questions about finances. How much had the kitchen renovation cost? Was Leo's firm as stable as the business journals claimed? Each question seemed to ratchet up my parents' anxiety. Mom repeatedly tried to change the subject, while Dad barely spoke a word. Then Eleanor turned to me. "Avery, how is your business recovering? Finding new clients?" Before I could form a response, Mom jumped in. "Avery's doing just fine, Eleanor. She doesn't need to discuss work at the dinner table." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "I was asking Avery, Clara." "It's been a challenge," I admitted, "but I'm starting to rebuild my client list." "That's my girl," Eleanor smiled. "Persistence is a family trait, at least for some of us." My mother's knuckles went white as she gripped her fork. Just as Mom brought out an elaborate tiramisu, the air grew thick with anticipation. Something was about to snap. In the dangerous silence that fell over the table, Eleanor spoke the words that would detonate our family's carefully built facade. "Avery, darling, I've been meaning to ask you," she said, her voice deceptively casual but her eyes sharp as glass. "Is the $2,000 I send you every month enough? If you need more while you're rebuilding, you only have to ask." My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "What money?" The silence that followed was absolute. Every head at the table swiveled to my parents, whose faces had drained of all color. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "What money, Grandma?" I repeated, my voice steadier now. Eleanor's gaze never left my mother. "Clara, perhaps you'd like to explain why Avery doesn't know about the monthly allowance I've been providing for her since she told me about her financial difficulties." Mom let out a high, strangled laugh. "Oh, Mother, there must be some misunderstanding." "Is there?" Eleanor cut her off, her voice like ice. "Because my bank statements show that for the past 5 years, I've been transferring $2,000 a month to an account you told me was Avery's emergency fund. You specifically told me she needed help with medical bills after being diagnosed with a chronic condition." My jaw dropped. "Medical condition, I'm perfectly healthy." "Elaine, we can explain," Dad finally whispered. "I certainly hope so, Robert," she replied. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and Clara have been taking money intended for your daughter and spending it on yourselves." "Mom, Dad," I looked at them, pleading for any other explanation. "What is she talking about?" My mother's face crumpled, then hardened with years of resentment. "You've always been her favorite, always getting special treatment. Why shouldn't we get some of the benefit from that?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "You've been stealing money meant for me for 5 years." "How much?" Eleanor's voice was a blade. Dad sighed, shoulders slumping in defeat. "About $120,000 over the past 5 years." The room spun. $120,000. Money that could have paid off my student loans, saved my business, changed everything. "And this past year," Eleanor continued, her eyes boring into my mother, "when Avery specifically told me she was struggling, I increased the monthly amount to $5,000. You assured me it was going into her account." Another $60,000. Gone. Spent on marble countertops and luxury cars while I was eating instant noodles and panicking about eviction. "How could you?" I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "Your own daughter." "You don't understand the pressure we're under," Mom said defensively. "We have appearances to maintain." "Appearances," I echoed, incredulous. "You stole from me to keep up appearances." The weight of their betrayal was a physical thing, crushing the air from my lungs. But the revelations weren't over. "Actually, I paid for her education," Eleanor interjected coolly. "The trust fund I established covered tuition for all 3 of my grandchildren." I turned to her confused. "Trust fund? What trust fund?" A look of grim understanding crossed Eleanor's face. "You never told her about that either, did you, Clara?" My head was spinning. All those years working 2 jobs in college, living with 4 roommates to save money, taking on loans, all while a trust fund sat waiting. "Where did that money go?" I finally managed to ask. "We had some investments that didn't pan out," Dad mumbled, unable to meet my eyes. "You gambled away my education fund." The betrayal deepened with every word. Leo let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Classic. Let me guess, you did the same thing with my trust." The guilty silence from our parents was all the answer he needed. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, slamming his glass down. "I've been killing myself at that soul-sucking job to pay off loans I never should have had." Chloe, who had been silent and pale, finally spoke. "What about my trust? Is that gone too?" The ensuing chaos was a blur of tears, accusations, and pathetic excuses. My mother sobbed about living in Eleanor's shadow, about never feeling good enough. My father tried to explain their mounting debts, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears, the sound of my entire life story being rewritten as a lie. "I think," Eleanor said, carefully folding her napkin, "that this dinner is over. And so is my financial support of you, Clara and Robert." "We'll lose everything," Dad whispered, the reality of their situation finally dawning on him. "Perhaps you should have considered that before you spent money that wasn't yours," Eleanor replied without a trace of sympathy. Without another word, I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out the front door. I could hear my mother screaming my name, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't stand to look at their faces. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them through the dining room window, a tableau of ruin. In that single, devastating moment, I knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. For 3 days, I didn't answer my phone. The messages from my parents morphed from defensive, "You don't understand the whole story," to desperate, "Please, we need to talk." On the 4th day, Eleanor called and left a single, simple voicemail. "Avery, when you're ready, I'm here. I love you." That message, free of guilt or demands, broke me. I called her back and drove to her house, a sanctuary from the chaos. Over tea, she laid out the full, sickening scope of their deception. It was worse than I imagined. The fraud went back a decade. They had siphoned money meant for a down payment on Leo's first house. They had invented a car accident to get money for Chloe's medical bills. And the cruelest cut of all, my student loans had been paid off from my trust fund 3 years ago. The $500 monthly payments I'd been faithfully making had been going directly into my parents' pockets. The total theft was close to $400,000. In the weeks that followed, my siblings and I clung to each other, our shared betrayal forging a new, unbreakable bond. Leo quit the finance job he hated. Chloe, finally free of the manufactured financial guilt, excelled in her graduate program. Meanwhile, my parents' house of cards collapsed. They lost the house, the cars, everything. Months later, I finally agreed to meet them at a neutral coffee shop. They looked like strangers, aged and defeated. "What you did," I said, my voice steady. "It wasn't just about the money. You stole my trust. You watched me struggle. You lied to my face for years. I don't know if I can ever forgive that." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door left slightly ajar. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, I stood in my new photography studio. With Eleanor's support, my business was not just surviving, it was thriving. My life had found a new, authentic rhythm. Sunday brunches with Eleanor, weekly dinners with Leo and Chloe, and a calendar full of creative work. My relationship with my parents remained a fragile, carefully navigated thing. They were trying, attending therapy and financial counseling, living in a small apartment. 1 year after that fateful night, my siblings, Eleanor, and I gathered for a new tradition, a family meeting, just the four of us. "I've been thinking about legacy," Eleanor began. "Not just financial, but ethical. What values do we want to carry forward?" We talked for hours, establishing a new foundation of transparency and trust. 2 years later, my life is unrecognizable. The betrayal almost broke me, but instead it remade me. It forced me to build a life on my own terms, one of truth and strength. The money was returned, but the real restoration was in my spirit. I had discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. Have you ever discovered a betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember that sometimes, losing what you thought you had is the only way to find what you truly deserve. Thank you for listening.